Hello guys, we are going to talk about a action drama film called Revenge from 2017. A lot of interesting things are waiting for you. Jen and her boyfriend Richard arrive by helicopter at a luxurious country house to finally get away from work and relax. They plan to spend the entire weekend there, enjoying relaxation, love, and sunbathing by the pool. The helicopter pilot treats them well, and as a gift, gives Richard a bag with a certain illegal substance that will make them have a good time. They just walk into the house and immediately both move to the bedroom to do what they do on vacation. In the evening, Richard receives a call from his wife. They have a nice conversation. He gives her advice about work, and in the background, we can hear their children playing. From this, we understand that Richard is not a positive character in this movie because he did not take his wife on vacation with Jen. After finishing the conversation, Richard goes back to bed with Jen. In the morning, Jen walks around the house with almost no clothes on and sees strangers with guns at the entrance. She is frightened, but it is Stan, Richard's friend. Dimitri came with him. They were supposed to arrive later, but they decided not to postpone something that could be done faster. They wanted to do some hunting in the woods, so they brought their guns and ammunition with them. Richard introduces his friends to Jen, and together they start having fun in different ways. Jen walks in front of them all day in provocative clothes, although they can hardly be called clothes. She strikes quite seductive poses, although this is strange because there are 3 armed men around her. In the evening, the company has a drink together, and the friends offer Richard to try a dried cactus, which will make him feel real pleasure. However, Richard refuses, explaining that this will be enough for the whole company, because this forbidden substance is very strong. He even recalls a story about a Pole who, under the influence of the substance, lost his leg and did not feel any pain, although he later died of blood loss. Richard hands Jen a bag of cactus and asks her to hide it away from him. She puts it in her locket and then goes to dance in front of the guests. She invites Richard to dance, but he refuses because he needs to entertain the guests somehow. Jen then picks up Stan and presses herself against him, provoking Richard. The plan works. Richard takes her to the bedroom in anger. In the morning, Richard leaves for business, leaving Jen with her friends. Stan decides not to waste time and begins to make overt hints to the girl, reminding her of yesterday's dance. However, today Jen is acting cold. She is going home, but Stan follows her, and seeing her change clothes, he is even more determined to get to know her better in every sense of the word. After a short conversation, during which Jen rejects him, he forcibly tears off her clothes. At this point, Dimitri enters, but seeing the situation, he decides to act diplomatically, turns around and leaves, not interfering in other people's problems. When Richard returns, his friends briefly tell him what happened. Richard goes to Jen to settle the situation. He transfers money to her account and promises to find a job for her as long as she keeps quiet about what happened to her today. She demands that he call a helicopter and send her home immediately. She threatens that if he doesn't, she will tell his wife about what happened. In response, Richard raises his hand at her. Angry, Jen runs away from the house because she realizes that something is not going according to plan. Richard and his friends chase her and catch up with her at the edge of a canyon. Richard promises to fulfill her demands and even calls a pilot to come and pick her up. Jen believes him, but Richard suddenly pushes her off the cliff. The girl falls on a tree, the top of which pierces her through. Richard convinces his friends to get rid of the body by going hunting. While they're getting ready, Richard calls his wife to just talk to her about life. You won't believe what happens next. At this time, Jen comes to. She finds her lighter that had fallen nearby and sets fire to the tree. As the tree weakens under the weight of her body, she is finally able to move as freely as she can, and exhausted, she crawls away to the canyon wall. When Richard and his friends arrive at the bottom, they do not find her body. Stan suggests that they find her and take her to the hospital, and then somehow solve the problem, but Richard is adamantly against it. He decides to find her and finish her off. The bloody trail that Jen leaves on the ground leads to the river. The friends split up. Richard goes in one direction, Dimitri in the other, and Stan stays where he is because he is afraid to go further. Meanwhile, Jen goes to the place where Dimitri has decided to do the most important thing. She sneaks up on his gun, grabs it, but realizes that it is not loaded. Dimitri tells his friends that he has found Jen and will deal with her himself. He drags the girl to the river and tries to send her to the next world in this way. At the same time, Dimitri confesses that he deliberately left the gun behind to lure Jen away. Despite the penetrating wound and a piece of wood sticking out of her stomach, Jen gathers her strength, grabs Dimitri's knife, and takes his life. After a few convulsive movements, Dimitri is quiet forever. Jen takes his knife, rifle, and backpack, gets on her ATV, and drives until she runs out of fuel. Exhausted, she continues on foot, finds a cave, makes a fire, and examines Dimitri's supplies. She is only interested in the can of energy drink. A piece of wood in her stomach starts to bother her a lot, and Jen decides to have it removed. However, she cannot do it without anesthesia. She remembers a dried cactus that will help dull the pain. After taking this peculiar medicine, she waits for the cactus to work, and then makes an incision and removes the problem from her abdomen. After the impromptu surgery, she stops bleeding. A bird-shaped burn remains on her stomach. Meanwhile, Richard calms down when he learns that Dimitri has found Jen and decides to hunt further. He finds Stan sleeping and takes him with him to the river, where they find Dimitri's body. Richard cold-bloodedly stoned the body, and then he and Stan threw it into the water. After this impromptu funeral for his friend, Stan's nerves are frayed, and he begins to blame Richard for all the problems. For this, Richard breaks his nose for some reason. After that, they continue to search for Jen. Meanwhile, the girl is struggling with hallucinations from the painkillers she took. The hallucinations become more and more unpleasant, but when they pass, she takes her weapon and goes hunting. Jen finds the tracks of her enemies near an abandoned ATV. Richard and Stan decide to split up to explore a larger area. Jen tracks down Stan, who is stopped on a mountain road to fill up the tank. As she creeps closer, she fires, but only wounds him. The girl follows the bloody trail, but Stan uses his personal method of stopping the bleeding and hides to attack the girl by surprise. As she passes by, he tries to take aim, but because of a shoulder wound, he only shoots Jen in the ear. She quickly regains consciousness and runs away. On the way, she breaks a flashlight, creating an obstacle for Stan. As she had predicted, he steps on the shards of glass. Injuring his leg, he returns to the ATV, gets in, and gritting his teeth in pain, gives chase. Jen meets him with an accurate shot and sends him to another world. After taking his vehicle, she returns to the ATV. Richard returns home without waiting for Stan. He takes a shower and calls the helicopter. Hearing a noise in the house, he begins to check the premises, but finds nothing. When Richard calms down and puts down his weapon, Jen appears outside the window and shoots, wounding him. Richard tries to shoot back, but realizes that he cannot win. He crawls down the hallway to trap the girl and hides. Jen follows his trail, but notices a puddle of blood flowing from his wound. She decides to go around him from behind. By this point, Richard has already moved on, and to stop the bleeding, he wraps himself in cling film. After that, Jen and Richard start hunting each other, circling the house. In the process, the girl slipped on his blood and lost her gun. While she was trying to crawl to it, Richard appears and hits her hard on the head. When Jen regains consciousness, Richard drags her by the legs, intending to take her life. But before he does so, he explains that unlike Stan and Dimitri, he will not allow her to do this to him. He calls her a girl who is only good for certain things, which is why he brought her here. Jen takes advantage of the pause and makes Richard feel the greatest pain of his life. Richard lets go of her, and she crawls to the gun, grabs it, and shoots him in the chest. The shot throws Richard against the wall. Taking a break after the exhausting battle, Jen gets up and walks through the blood-stained house. On the terrace, she sees the pool and hears the sound of a helicopter approaching. It's Roberto coming to pick up Richard, but unfortunately, taking a person from another world is not so easy.